"I'm sorry, sir, but we have a reputation to uphold. This lobby is for guests, not for people like you." The air in the Grand Azure was heavy with the scent of lilies and the crushing weight of elitism. I stood there in a grease-stained hoodie and worn-out sneakers, holding a tattered suitcase. To the world, I was a drifter. To the manager, Marcus, I was a stain on his marble floor. "Please," I rasped. "I have a reservation." Marcus didn't even check the screen. He adjusted his silk tie, a gift I had authorized for his excellence, and signaled security. "Leave before I have you removed. We don't serve your kind." As wealthy guests whispered, a maid named Elena dropped her brush. She walked past the guards and looked Marcus dead in the eye. "If he doesn't stay, I don't work," she said, her voice a calm fire that silenced the room. "Stay with me, because in 60 seconds the man Marcus called trash is going to take his entire world away." Hit that subscribe button now. The payback in this lobby is about to become legendary. Julian Thorne lived a life that most people only saw in movies, yet he felt like he was watching his own existence through a thick sheet of bulletproof glass. From his 80th floor penthouse, the city of Atlanta looked like a toy set, and the people below were merely dots on a map of his $12 billion hospitality empire. He was the king of the clouds, a man who controlled 45 luxury hotels across 3 continents, yet he couldn't remember the last time he had felt the warmth of a genuine conversation. Every person he met was a shark in a tailored suit, looking for a way to sink their teeth into his influence or his bank account. He sat at his mahogany desk, surrounded by the silent humming of servers and the blinking lights of his security system. His latest quarterly report showed record profits, but Julian felt a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of money could fill. He thought of his father, a man who had started with a single roadside motel and a belief that every guest deserved a clean bed and a kind word. His father had warned him, "A king who only sees his kingdom from a balcony never knows if the foundation is rotting. Eventually, the height makes you forget what the ground feels like." Julian realized he had forgotten. He looked at his reflection in the window, a man in a $15,000 suit with eyes that looked a century old. He decided that night to perform a stress test on his own soul. He wanted to know if Julian Thorne had any value without the Thorne name attached to him. He called his head of security, Saiku, and told him to go home. He went to his closet and bypassed the rows of bespoke Italian wool, reaching instead for a faded, grease-stained hoodie he had kept from his college days and a pair of scuffed sneakers. He looked in the mirror and didn't see a CO, he saw a ghost. He packed a tattered suitcase with a few essentials and walked out of the service entrance of his own building. He didn't take the armored limousine waiting in the bay. Instead, he walked 3 miles through the humid city air, his feet beginning to blister, heading for his flagship hotel, the Grand Azure. He wanted to see if the world-class hospitality he preached in boardrooms was a reality or just a marketing slogan. He wanted to find a human connection that wasn't bought and paid for. He was a billionaire looking for the sun, walking toward a storm he had accidentally built himself. For Elena, the Grand Azure wasn't a palace of luxury, it was a battlefield of shadows and stains. She had worked as a maid for 7 years, and in that time she had learned how to become invisible. She knew the exact frequency of the vacuum cleaner that wouldn't disturb a sleeping guest and the precise way to fold a towel so it looked like art. She was a single mother fighting a quiet war for her son's future, working 10-hour shifts that left her back aching and her hands raw from cleaning chemicals. To the guest, she was part of the architecture, no more significant than the wallpaper or the heavy velvet drapes. But the real war wasn't against the dirt, it was against the man who ran the hotel. Marcus, the general manager, was a man who worshipped status the way some people worship gods. He had spent years turning the Grand Azure into an exclusive club where only the right people were welcome. He viewed the staff as replaceable tools and the less-than-perfect guests as intruders who lowered the property value. Elena had watched him cut the health benefits for the cleaning crew while he moved into a new luxury condo, and she had seen him humiliate a junior bellhop for daring to speak to a celebrity guest. Elena stayed because she had no choice. Every floor she polished and every bed she stripped was a brick in the foundation of her son's education. She lived in a neighborhood where the sirens never stopped, and her only goal was to move her child into the light. She had learned to swallow her pride, to keep her head down when Marcus made a joke at her expense, and to endure the cold stares of the socialites who looked through her as if she were made of glass. She was a soldier of the shadows, maintaining her dignity in a place that tried to strip it away every single day. On this particular Tuesday, Elena was exhausted. She was scrubbing a spill near the gold-trimmed check-in desk, her knees hurting against the cold marble. She watched as Marcus preened for a group of influencers, his voice a rehearsed melody of fake warmth. She felt a familiar surge of resentment, wondering how a man so hollow could hold so much power over her life. She didn't know that tonight her quiet war was about to go loud. She didn't know that the man in the grease-stained hoodie walking through the revolving doors was the only person in the world who could see her for who she truly was. The Grand Azure was bustling with the elite of the city when Julian Thorne walked through the entrance. The contrast was jarring. The golden light of the chandeliers seemed to pull away from his faded hoodie and scuffed shoes. He stood in the check-in line, his tattered suitcase held together by a prayer, watching Marcus interact with a famous actress. Marcus was all smiles and polished charm, his diamond cufflinks glinting under the lights. But when Julian finally reached the desk, the manager's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Marcus didn't see a guest, he saw a liability. He didn't even bother to check the computer for the reservation Julian had made under a pseudonym. Instead, he leaned over the counter, his voice dropping into a snarl that was meant to be quiet but was loud enough for the nearby socialites to hear. "I don't know how you got past the doorman, but this isn't a homeless shelter. You're making the guests uncomfortable. Move along before I call the authorities." Julian stood his ground, his heart hammering against his ribs, not out of fear but out of a cold, rising fury. The confrontation escalated as Julian insisted he had a room. Marcus's face twisted with a sense of triumph. He loved these moments. They made him feel powerful, like he was the gatekeeper of a sacred temple. He began to mock Julian's appearance, calling him a vagrant and a drain on the city's resources. He signaled for 2 burly security guards to seize Julian's arms. The wealthy guests in the lobby began to titter and point, recording the drama on their phones as if it were a scene from a reality show. Julian felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes, realizing that his father was right. The foundation was rotting from the top down. As the guards moved in, Julian looked at Marcus and saw a man who had completely forgotten what it meant to be a servant to others. He saw a man who used a Thorne paycheck to fund a lifestyle of cruelty. Just as the guards reached for him, a sudden sound interrupted the chaos. It was the sound of a heavy scrub brush hitting the floor. Elena, the maid who had been invisible only seconds before, walked directly into the center of the conflict. She stood between Julian and the guards, her small frame radiating a fierce, protective energy that silenced the entire room. "He has a reservation," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And even if he didn't, he's a human being. If you throw him out, you'll have to throw me out too." The silence that followed Elena's defiance was so heavy it felt like it might crack the marble floor. Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape, unable to process that a member of the help was challenging him in front of his precious elite guests. "You're fired, Elena," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and embarrassment. "Go back to the gutter where you found your friend. I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Elena didn't move. She stood her ground, her hand resting on the handle of Julian's tattered suitcase, a final act of solidarity for a man she thought had nothing. Julian looked at her, and for the first time in years, the hollow ache in his chest vanished. He saw a soul that was worth more than his entire $12 billion conglomerate. He straightened his back, his presence suddenly shifting from a drifter to something far more dangerous. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a sleek, black titanium card, the Genesis card. There were only 3 in existence. One for the president of the central bank, one for a reigning monarch, and one for the chairman of Thorne International. He didn't hand it to Marcus. He handed it to Elena. "Call the corporate hotline," Julian said, his voice dropping the raspy disguise and ringing with the cold authority of a sovereign. "Tell them the chairman is in the lobby of the Grand Azure, and he is ready to sign the dissolution papers for the current management. Now." Marcus's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of ash. He recognized the card. He recognized the tone of command that could only come from a man who owned the very air in the room. Within seconds, the automatic doors hissed open as 4 black SUVs flooded the entrance. A dozen men in charcoal suits burst into the lobby, moving with the synchronized lethality of a Secret Service detail. They ignored the shocked socialites and the cowering manager, forming a protective perimeter around the man in the grease-stained hoodie. Saiku, the head of security, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your car is ready, Mr. Thorne, and the board is on standby." Julian didn't look at the cars. He looked at Marcus, who was now trembling so violently his diamond cufflink rattled. Julian reached out and snapped the cufflink off the manager's sleeve. "This was for excellence," Julian whispered, his eyes like ice. "But you wouldn't know excellence if it stood in front of you for 1,000 years. You're not just fired, you're finished." 3 months later, The Grand Azure had undergone a transformation that had nothing to do with furniture or paint. The golden-rimmed desk remained, but the spirit behind it had changed. Marcus was gone, last seen working as a janitor at a bus station in the next state over, finally learning what it felt like to be invisible to the world. He had tried to sue, but Julian's legal team had buried him in a mountain of evidence regarding his theft of employee commissions and his systemic abuse of staff. Marcus was a lesson learned. A reminder that power without empathy is just a slow-acting poison. Back at the Grand Azure, the lobby no longer smelled of fake lilies and elitism. It smelled of genuine hospitality. Julian had realized that Elena hadn't just saved a broke guest that night. She had saved his entire company from becoming a heartless machine. He didn't just give her a bonus or a promotion. He made her the director of guest experience for the entire Thorn Empire. He tasked her with rewriting the training manuals and ensuring that every person who walked through a Thorn door, whether they wore a tuxedo or a tattered jacket, was treated with the same dignity. Julian was no longer the king of the clouds. He spent more time on the ground, visiting his hotels in disguise, not to test his staff, but to remind himself of the beauty of a simple human connection. He had found his real nourishment. He sat in the lobby of the Azure, watching as Elena, now in a sharp, professional suit, greeted a family who looked tired and worn from a long day of travel. She didn't look at their luggage or their clothes, she looked at their eyes. She offered them a warm smile and a bottle of water before they even reached the desk. The story ended where it had begun, but with a different light. Julian watched Elena lead her first board meeting later that afternoon, where she spoke about the value of the invisible soldiers who kept the empire running. Julian realized that the richest person in any room isn't the one with the biggest bank account, but the one with the biggest heart. He wasn't a dragon in a gold cage anymore. He was a man who had finally found his home, and as long as Elena was leading the way, the Grand Azure would always be a place where the sun reached everyone.